Hello everyone, and welcome to another class in qualitative research. Last time we talked about case study and we talked about qualitative research and grounded theory, and tonight we're talking about historical research. We're discussing a very nice and easy to understand type of design, which is the historical research design. I'll try to make it easy and not dig too deep into details that might be too overwhelming for you, but this design is pretty much straightforward and it comes from its name. So what is historical research? It's basically a collection of past events. You want to explore more about incidents and things happened in the past for the purpose of understanding it more and providing new knowledge that will provide new understanding for the readers nowadays. So you are really looking at the past to make a better understanding for the future, or things that went wrong in the past that you want to avoid in the future. So it's really based on understanding and also to make things better. It's the purpose of it at the very end step in the analysis section is more to introduce solutions, more to introduce better ways of doing things, learning from the past to make a better future type of thing. So it's a qualitative research, as you can see, because you don't have control group, you don't have a treatment, and you don't have manipulation of over variables. You're basically looking at a collection of data across the years, and you're trying to make sense, interpret these data, and then come up with a final lesson at the end as your thematic units. So in a nutshell, that's historical research. Now, there are specific elements in our historical research, and in order to reach the elements, you have to understand the purpose why. And it's basically to learn from the past, like I said, apply them to present day, to teach practitioners new things and lessons from things that happened in the past, make predictions of what might happen in the future for present events based on what happened in the past. What I want you to do right now is to click on this. I hope that you have the PowerPoint open while you're listening to the PowerPoint, and go over with me step by step. And what I want you to do is just pause my instruction here and highlight this link and open it and watch the video, and then come back to the next slides for me. You're going to watch a short video. It's not going to complete with you. It will stop because you have to have subscription for this website, but the first part is the most important one that you're going to watch, because it will give you a solid introduction of historical research, what it means by example and by visuals. And I always like to provide visuals to make things less dull, so I think this aims to this goal, this video. So just please pause now, go ahead, watch it, and come back to me. Okay, so you should have listened to the video and watched it carefully to understand about the meaning of historical research. And the example of the Holocaust is a very good example of an incident happened in the past, and this lingering question of why this thing happened in the past and how can I avoid it to happen in the future, and what are the things that people need to understand more about what happened in the past in order to be conscious about it in the present and maybe set rules and new procedures to avoid it in the future. Now, how can you do that? How can you look at a past incident and make sense out of it to come to that conclusion? You have to go through the data collection process in order to get to the data analysis. Now, the data collection process starts with locating the resources that you want to explore. And since these are historical information, then your sources have to be archives, things that will help you to look back at important information that happened in the past. So you will depend on primary and secondary resources that involves documents, records, archives, newspapers, magazines, all of these resources to learn more about the past. Then you'll have to summarize information, gather all of this data that you're reading and summarize them to have something solid. And then, of course, well, I would put the evaluation of the historical resource before summarizing. So when you collect the resources, you will have to evaluate them to make sure that you are meeting internal and external criticism. You have to address that in your writing. So when you say that it meets external criticism, then it means that you're looking at the value added from the sources, and we're going to discuss it more in details in the next slides. Then you will start to summarize information and collect the data from what you're reading, and then you analyze the data. I'm going to talk about each one in more detail. So the data collection has these steps. You collect, you evaluate, you summarize, and then after you finish the data collection, part of the methodology is the data analysis. Now, so what is the meaning of primary source and what is the meaning of secondary source? The primary source are these stronger in value resources. These sources are like newsletters, like well-documented archives, pictures, all of that makes it primary. It's more solid. Books by well-known authors. But in secondary sources, these are prepared by individuals who are not really directly are witnessed. They're historians maybe, but not a witnesser who is writing memorandum of what was happening, the memory of memoir, of what he had gone through. So if it's a memoir, if it's a newspaper that documented an incident that happened in that age of time, stamped original documentations in the archives, all of these are primary sources. But if it's more of magazine discussions, a historian that's writing something about what incidents happened in the future from his own perspective, these are considered secondary sources. So here are more examples of primary and secondary sources. And some further tools that a researcher in the historical research can use is the contemporaneous corporation, a person lived in contemporary ages of that period of time, to check for solid information. Photography that was, again, stamped and well certified. Logs of stories and signatures of people, memoirs. All of these are considered important tools for a researcher writing a historical research. Now, for data collection, after you get to find your sources and you kind of sort them into primary and secondary sources, you have to evaluate it for external and internal validity and criticize them in that sense. So if it's an external criticism, you want to make sure that it's valid for its authenticity and genuineness of the data. You want to ask yourself questions like, who was the author? Not merely what was his name, but what were his personality, character, position, and so forth. What were his general qualifications as a reporter, his stance and biases and subjectivity to the issue? What are his special qualifications or disqualifications as a reporter? How related was he to the incident? And all of these are things that you want to address in order to address external criticism. How soon after the events was the document written? That's another question that you want to ask yourself. Was it too soon? Was it something after reevaluation, or was it a historian talking about his own perspective, narrating what happened in the past? This is for purpose and of the quality of writing. Now, in internal criticism, it's the determination of the reliability of correctly interpreting the content of the document. So you're basically looking at the trustworthiness of the content of the document, the value and worth of its content, its literal meaning, and the reliability of the statements themselves. Maybe carried on positively or negatively, the first being the approach of discovering the real meaning of the text. And so you want to address all of that. Is this the right meaning of the text? Are you aware of any biases that might be occurring in the interpretation? To ensure reliability, the researcher examines each document to make sure that the meanings of facts and statements were clearly understood. So after you look at the authenticity of the document, which is the external criticism, the next question is to establish the validity of the content, which is the internal criticism. Okay? In performing internal criticism, you must make several determinations which require historical knowledge beyond the material in the question. You have to have more understanding of the incident itself. So, in order to validate your understanding, you can always look at asking different people who might have lived during that stage. Maybe validate your understanding from parallel documentation that talks about the same issue. Knowledge about the different perspectives that happened within that age, and then evaluate from there. This will give validity of your argument that you looked at several perspectives, several parts of the documentations that documented this period of time, and then you analyze based on the variety of content that you have. So after you did the sources, you evaluated their external and internal validity based on this kind of criticism, you start to gather the data. So you gather the data, you write them down as a sort of gathering, just writing down, putting them all under your narration. Then, after you have all the data needed, you will start to analyze data. And data analysis and qualitative research revolves around the same way that you should be analyzing. You read through the data, reread, and that's important in qualitative research, that you read and reread the data that you collected. Then you start to categorize code first, the repeated themes. Then you start to categorize your ideas, and then you thematically put them in thematic units, and then explain each of these themes. Now, in historical research, your themes will be basically the lessons that you want to pass it on for people in the field that you're looking at. So for the example of the Holocaust, and you want to prevent genocide, then your themes are the things that led to that situation or this genocide, and then your discussion of these themes will be your final results. That is, how can we avoid these themes or these reasons of what happened. So you first have to make sure that you are not biased and subjective, and through the first step of looking at the documentation, examining external and internal validity, when you collect the data, you want to make sure that your data are interpreted and categorized in a manner that really shows a lot of logic. This logic will ensure less subjectivity, and you really can't ensure that there is no subjectivity, because qualitative research comes with a lot of subjectivity. So you can't say ensuring it, but you are really making sure that you have less biases and less subjectivity, basically. So you do the gathering of content, you use patterns or themes, coding them, and then you validate your interpretation in the final results. Let me write it in now that I'm writing it, I think I'll do it in a more organized. So probably gather data, code, categorize, and I hope that you're saying this with me now, that you know what to do. And then themes, and these themes will be in a historical research probably what and why things happened. And then the final piece of your data analysis is the results, and that's when you do the discussion. And in a historical research, your discussion is basically telling me the learned lessons for us to avoid things that happened in the past or to do better in the future. Okay, and here this is the advantages and the disadvantages. The advantages: it permits investigation of topics of question in the past, and I want answers in the present or for the future. The disadvantages is that you cannot control anything, really. You have whatever documentation you got, that's what you're going to use, and you never know if it has solid validity and reliability or not. Limitations are imposed due to the content of analysis. You're analyzing things based on your personal interpretation, and no matter how much you can do to avoid being subjective, you might fall into this subjectivity. Researchers cannot ensure representation of the sample. Again, it's whatever you found, that's what you are working based on. But in many situations, it gives good, and the key word for historical research is logic. You're trying to interpret things and analyze things to make logic out of it, to help people understand why and how things happened in the past, and how and what can you do in the present or in the future in order to learn from the past mistakes, basically. So I'm going to add this new version of the steps. You have all the way until here for the steps of proposal, and I added historical research, the data collection. You're going to talk about it, and then you're going to of course you'll have to have an introduction. So introduce, that's the steps. We're talking about the steps. So you're going to do an introduction of what you're going to do, and then a quick explanation of the procedure. In qualitative research, it's really important to talk about the procedure because it's very detail oriented and it has to be done in a specific way, specifically in the historical research. And then you start your data collection, locating. What are you going to do in order to locate resources? What kinds of resources are you going to use? Summarizing the information. How are you summarizing them? And what will you do in order to look at internal criticism and external criticism? Actually, you're going to tell me how it's internally valid and externally valid, your own sources that you picked. And then the data analysis is the same as we talked about, the coding, categorization, thematic, and then the results at the end. And then validity and reliability is really part of your internal and external criticism. So I would just have it included within here. You don't need to readdress it again. So summarizing information, you're going to tell me about how you're going to summarize it, and then have internal and external validity as part of credibility. And then just okay. The way you're going to do the headings and subheadings, please follow APA style. So if this is a number 2 heading, then this is a number 3 heading, or you don't have to put this heading. This is for me to just tell you what is the content here. But if you want to do a heading, then you have to follow heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, and you can definitely use OWL Purdue for APA formatting. If you're not familiar with it, please let me know, and you can just shoot me an email, tell me, okay, how can I find the OWL Purdue APA style website, and I can load this, add this to Blackboard, and then you can access it to make sure that you're following the headings and subheadings. But mainly these bulleted points are for you to just know what is the content that needs to be included under each of these headings, basically. So you don't have to have a heading for it. You just need to make sure that this kind of content is included. Again, however, if you want to or prefer to have a subheading of that subheading and call it credibility, then you have to follow the headlines or headings format. Okay. I think that covers the historical research.